All right, good. Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Graber, and I want to talk about Trimble for a little bit. And let you know what we're doing with Gemalto and with licensing. So the first thing I'd like to start with is just a little history of Trimble. I'll go through it as quickly as I can. And sorry about if you can't read it. Hopefully you'll be able to get access to this presentation later, because some of the content is a little bit hard to read. Okay, so this is the timeline of Trimble, and it's interesting. Trimble started and became a company in 1978, and that's the same year that the first satellite, Navstar GPS satellite, went into orbit. The concept came from the Sputnik. I think it was the Sputnik and the Explorer, and those were the first two satellites to go into orbit, 1957 or 58, and the Sputnik was it's only like it's a little ball, it's like the size of a beach ball. But anyway, the people were able to, the frequency of the sounds coming off of these satellites, they were able to use that change in frequency to determine location. So that's how the whole concept of the GPS or GNSS started. GNSS is Global Navigation System, right? Satellite system. And then in 1982, oh, by the way, the GPS satellite system was first started by DARPA and the Air Force. And I'm not a military guy. I know this is a little bit military beginning, but it moved over into civilian after that. And then it was taken over by the Department of Defense. Well, in 1982, then the U.S. had 7 satellites in orbit, and we're starting to test those. And then Russia started their first satellite system called GLONASS. In 1986, the 12th satellite was in orbit, and then they actually were able to start using the system for testing missiles, like the cruise missile. In fact, that was the start of what the Tomahawk missile started during. That was the first missile that was using satellite GPS guidance. And then in 1990, with 16 satellites in orbit, the Navstar GPS system became operational. And it had a built-in error rate of only 60 feet versus, 8 miles, I think, prior to that, plus or minus 8 miles. So accuracy was immediately improved significantly. And then Trimble became public that year because they needed to raise money to provide these satellite boxes to the Schwarzkopf, to General Schwarzkopf, and the Army for the Gulf War. And there was a tremendous advantage because in a desert with really nothing but desert all around, they were able to use the navigation system to figure out where they were. And that war only lasted 4 days. So, and then in 1993, then the Department of Transportation starts to jointly manage the GPS system with the Department of Defense, and then it starts becoming available for civilian use. So then, finally in 1995, the GPS system, and they kind of dropped the Navstar piece of it. It became fully operational, 24 satellites covering the entire globe 24/7. And GLONASS finished the same year, and the European Galileo system was announced that same year. So this is a picture of the box. It was called the Slugger, or SLAN-PS10. And it could be used, they could carry it on their backs, or they could put it on a vehicle, or even on a helicopter. And so you see now that there's actually 30 satellites, and then an additional spare 31, and then there's 2 that are ready to launch also, so that they can always maintain global coverage. And you can see GLONASS there with 24. Galileo is due to complete with 30 satellites in the year 2020. Compass will complete with 35 satellites. It's a Chinese satellite system in 2020. And then NAVIC is India. It's not a global system, it's a regional system. And then finally, the Koizo Zenith, which is Japan. So it's pretty crazy. I don't know if you call it space junk yet, but there's a lot of satellites on space. These are the ones that we know of, right? In fact, They didn't make the, I don't think they announced it publicly until 1983 when they announced that they had actually started launching these satellites. So now that turned in, as soon as that became available for civilian use, then this acquisition phase started. And I know you can't read this, but I just wanted to show you the number of acquisitions that have taken place since 1990 for Trimble. So there's page 1, there's page 2, page 3, 4, 5, and 6. So a lot of software companies, right? And so you saw it was a hardware company when it started. In fact, it was almost exclusively hardware, and now it's getting to be more and more software. In fact, it's almost 50-50 now. Trimble is 50% hardware and 50% software. And in that period of time, 45 software companies were acquired, many with multiple apps. And fortunately, our mergers and acquisitions guy, Jürgen Klemm, is retiring at the end of the year. So hopefully it won't have quite as many acquisitions. Anyway, Trimble now is broken up into 4 groups: geospatial, which is survey. Although survey is really kind of expanded into scanning and the different things. Buildings and infrastructure, which is the area that where I started working in. And then resources and utilities, and that includes agriculture and forestry. And then finally transportation. And actually the military deal is actually part of transportation. I'm not sure why, but a lot of our military, our avionics ended up got sold to Honeywell at some point in 1995 or something like that. So Honeywell took over a lot of that. Okay, so why we did what we did. So with all these acquisitions, all these software, all kinds of deliverables and all kinds of licensing, and all kinds of different uses. So we were really trying to streamline how we do software delivery. It's just not feasible to try and manage 45 different processes. And so then also to convert software to services. So I think they talked about yesterday about shipping software or disk in a box or a dongle in a box. We still do a dongle in a box in some cases. But obviously the move is to try and get to electronic delivery. Now, one of the things that we're really looking at with Gemalto is that the Salesforce.com connector. And so that what we really like to do is take the demo. So demos and trials can be difficult to run out of the, and once you do a demo, well, then you have to create a separate part number, and a lot of times maybe even 2 or 3 part numbers. So we're really looking at moving demos and trials out of our ERP system and moving them into Salesforce.com using the connector, the Gemalto connector. And then recurring billing. Wow. You think it's easy. I thought it would be easy too, right? But it's not. We have almost not every month, but a lot of times we have issues where we have to do credits because we just didn't do the billing quite right. So it's difficult. Okay, so why Sentinel? Now, I just wanted to show you a list of these companies. These are what we consider to be kind of the top subscriber companies in the world. And you can see some of them are approaching $10 billion a month in subscription revenue. Right, so that's big time. Obviously, Trimble is not there yet, but maybe someday. I think we have somewhere between 2 and 3 million subscribers today. I don't know the exact dollars per month. But the intent is to try and get on that list. And you can see some of the companies are cell phone companies. And some of them, like Amazon Prime, $10 seems to be a sweet spot. Spotify, I want to talk about those guys later. Spotify did 30 million subscriptions last year. So that's 1 subscription every second. So I don't know if we could, if you were to try and, sometimes our subscription process can take 15, 20 minutes. So there's no way, we'd have to have like 100 people just doing subscriptions. So there's a method to that we need to try and figure out. Another thing that a lot of these companies have is a really good sign-up process. And so I want to talk about that a little bit later. You can see here Adobe, they have a user base of 13 million people, 13 million users. And their subscriber base now is 9 million. So they've almost converted their entire installed base to subscription, which is something that is pretty amazing. You see that Autodesk isn't quite there yet, 1.3 million subscribers versus an installed base of 8 million. There's a couple of them down below. This Birchbox, I don't know if you're familiar with that. A lot of, I guess this is just turning into a real craze because for $10 a month, you get effectively $40 or $50 worth of stuff. And I know that's happening with in the clothing market and even in food, groceries. And then that last one, MoviePass. This one is, I think, ready to explode. They dropped their price from $50 a month down to $10 a month. And for $10 a month, you can go to a movie every day, one of 6,000 theaters. So if you're into movies, I would, my kid, I need to get one for my kid. But I think that MoviePass, right now it's at 300,000. I think that's going to explode. Another reason why we are working with Gemalto and Sentinel is to prevent theft while we're trying to get to a better delivery system while we're moving in that direction. These are 4 sites that are selling our stuff, and we have no clue who they are. In some cases, they might not actually be. I don't know if it's really cracked. And the big word is crack, right? They cracked the software. And so we're working closely with Gemalto to try and make sure that we don't have any theft. And some companies, I've heard as much as 50% or 60% of their software is pirated. So that's one other reason why it really makes sense to go to a subscription model for us or try and move in that direction. So here's what we're doing. Now, this is going to take a while, but if you think about it, you place an order, you get a code, or you place an order, you get a product. So it's order. And even with our perpetual software today, place the order, get the entitlement, and then convert it into a license or convert it into a code. But one of the things that we're really looking at is flipping that around because the activation or the activation event itself is so pivotal. So in this particular case, what we're talking about here is we're talking about starting with the activation. So you forget it, you're not really placing an order, you're going directly to the sign-up process, right? And then when you sign up, then the order happens in the background and the entitlement happens in the background. And it all happens at one event, but you're really starting with the activation. Another thing here that we do, that we want to do is we want to use the dealer or the distributor's credit to expose purchasing at the end customer level. So in other words, if I say, okay, Mr. End Customer, I'm going to let you use my bill to. So I'm giving you access to this site, conditional access. You're going to have to log in. But then you can buy using my bill to address all day long. And if I have 1,000 dealers that I do that to, then I could theoretically do one sign up every second. Or whatever Spotify did, 30 million in a year. So that's the theory here, is that the order and the entitlement really kind of happens magically in the background, and it's all about the activation that you can key on. Another thing that's happening, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, it's the accounting. It's a group called the Financial Accounting Standards Board and the Accounting Standards Codification 606. Yeah. Our accounting people have been working on that for like the whole year. And effectively what and I think the first time they've done it in like decades, where they're actually redefining the way you present or the way you post your revenue to SEC or wherever for subscriptions. And what is it? Performance obligations. Yeah, so anyway, we're in the middle of that too. Now, I think this process where you activate first will make that a lot easier, right? Because that activation. Because these some of our guys say, oh, I think we're gonna stockpile or we're gonna inventory subscriptions. It's just a little, I don't think it makes sense. I mean, people talk about it, but it's just bizarre, right? So I think that concept is probably not a good one. It's better to try and drive that subscription event or the activation right up front. Okay, so a couple of examples. This is SketchUp. Google, I can't remember, they bought a company in 2004. Anyway, it was this, and changed the name to SketchUp. And then they bought another company in 2006, and it was Keyhole, right? And so Keyhole ended up being Google Earth. And then the SketchUp was supposed to be a tool where all these people could populate buildings, could end up building everything on top of Google Earth. So that you went onto Google Earth, you'd have actually a 3D representation of all these buildings. And they've got fairly far on that. I mean, they made some headways on that. And for some reason, they ended up selling SketchUp to Trimble. And so now Trimble owns SketchUp, and that was in 2012, I think. And SketchUp has been it's called a freemium, right? So it's a free software. And so it's got, somewhere between 15 and 20 million users. And then there's a pro version where you pay, and I don't know what percentage, but it's a fairly small percentage right now of people that are actually paying for it. But it is certainly a huge opportunity for us. Between this SketchUp, which is CAD, right, computer automated design, and Tekla, which is another company we acquired. It was around $500 million acquisition about 5 years ago as well. It's a Finland company, and they do what they call BIM, or Building Information Management. So between the CAD solution, SketchUp, and BIM, Tekla, we feel like we have a huge opportunity to try and drive subscription revenue with these two products. So this is another company that we acquired called Safara. And what you do is you create a building, and then you can geolocate it somewhere on Google Earth, right? I think you need 2 corners, right? You need the coordinates for 2 corners, and then you just make sure it's level. And then you run this Safari program, and it simulates the weather, the sun, the moon. And so it'll tell you exactly how much lighting and energy, and I think you do wind, that you need. So it's pretty amazing. Now, this is definitely a cloud application, right? Because it's huge. I don't know how big this database is, to try and figure out all the weather patterns throughout the globe. But it's not something that you would typically have on your laptop. So we think that this is a really good application for the Sentinel cloud. So you'll be able to put your building out there, plop it onto Google Earth, and then run this software to figure out all your, they call it building performance requirements. This is another one called Trimble Forensics, and this is software that police officers use for accidents. And I've seen a couple accidents in the last couple of days, actually. One was a 4-car one. It looked pretty bad. Where one car hit each other, or 4 cars that were hooked together. And so what happens, though, is you end up with this huge traffic jam, right? In some cases, they can take hours, maybe even a half day to get all this stuff off, and they have to measure everything. Well, the Trimble Forensics software is intended to make that easier, so that a police officer can, using a handheld, he can geolocate all of the areas on the where the accident is, and then figure out what kind of vehicles it is, and get his reporting done very quickly, and be able to do that in such a way where he can then push that report right up into the cloud immediately. And even to the point where if I have, let's say, 100 officers in this municipality, I maybe don't need 100 of these licenses. Maybe I only need 10 or 15, because not every officer is going to need this software all the time. And if it's cloud-based, they can just grab it, grab the license, run their reporting, and then just put it back and get their reporting done much quicker. There's 2 versions. One is called Smart Roads, which is for non-fatal accidents. And then there's another one called Reveal, which is for fatal accidents, and then also for crimes. So this is software that we've recently introduced that we're very excited about. What the software allows you to do is it allows you to take the coordinates and then put in the vehicle and everything, and then it will simulate the crash for you, so that you can use it for, if you get into a scenario where there's a dispute over what happened, you can actually run this software, and it will say, okay, well, here's what the software says happened based on the data that I provided. In this particular case, this was a Corvette that got pretty beat up, wrapped around a tree. And what you can also do with this is the reveal. You can run a scanner. Now, this is not a handheld. This is a more robust scanning device. And this will actually create around 4 billion points of, I guess it's called a point cloud. And then it'll also paint the vehicle so that it looks real. And so the picture on the right is a digital version of the car on the left. And that will be stored in the cloud forever, right? So if you ever need to go back and look at what happened, you have that available to you. And then if you get into a situation where there's a dispute, the software will actually do simulations. So this is a simulation of a 2D simulation of an accident. This is, again, based on the data that is collected by the officer in a relatively short period of time. And here's a 3D version of it. Yeah, so if you're in a situation where the driver said, well, it wasn't me, you can run this at a trial or whatever and make it pretty obvious, or really help kind of try and figure out what really happened. Okay, so that's it. I wanted to just say that with these types of applications, we really and using cloud services, we really feel that we'll be able to go a long ways with these types of applications. Use the Gemalto tools, and then combine the EMS system with some of the other tools that we use in terms of e-commerce and CRM, and get on that list. Maybe we'll get to where Verizon or AT&T are someday. So, thank you.
So all these years, Bill, I never knew we were helping to transform the way the world works. I'm gonna start. That's my new title. We help change the world. So I'm going to add just a little bit of details and some color around how we help Trimble transform the way the world works in our company. So how we sort of move from really helping and enable to sell and support differently. As Bill mentioned, they still have the dongle in the box, and some of their processes couldn't support a subscription. It takes, 15, 20 minutes, you said, to get a subscription out, where the expectation is near the point of demand on a subscription, I want access to my stuff. So we'll show how we help and are helping Trimble to sort of get through some of that. So when we engage with our customer, we typically uncover common systems like this. You may see some that you have, and you may have some more. But most of these systems really play a part in getting something out of the door, whether it's the billing, the ERP, the license, the entitlement, CRM, et cetera. They play a hand in getting something to the customer to fulfill, to ideally close an order or help with a renewal. When we work with customers, we look at sort of the workflows and your desired outcome and efficiency gains to really recommend where and how any integration should happen, to really help to automate some, as Bill mentioned, looking from the billing side. They're automating some things there for delivery standpoint. Shameless plug with Aria. You can come in the back and you can see more about the billing side. So I'll be skimp on those details to force you into the room later. So we go through this process, right? And we uncover with Trimble and other companies, usually looking at the existing process of fulfillment. So this is probably a cleaner version than you may know of internally. Usually there's one or two people that you can name and a trusted spreadsheet that they have for licensing and how to track and get things out. But we typically see a common process where, of course, there's an interaction with the customer, and once they have enough information to go to the sales admin, a quote is created from that quote. You're working out from the order, and you have to talk to a licensing admin. They may not even know they have that particular title, but that's their function. They have to do something with licensing where they maybe one or a person who might work with the company right now. They have 5 people on the operations team that does this license admin functionality, and we're exploring some efficiency gains with them. But they go and they generate a license, and they may update or add something to the install base, and they have to do this before the product gets out. So if it's a license file or if it's the dongle in the box that's shipped out to the customer, which at this point now once it's received, you can do rev rec. Right, so that pretty lengthy process according to timing. So I'd hate to be having to, be the sales rep, and you sold, something the last day of the quarter, and you need that dongle to get out to make or break your quarter. Tough job. So we work with Trimble, and sort of they had a very similar process. And from the back-end side, we'll talk some about that before we move to the cloud pieces builders with his 3D software. So really looking at how we help to automate and streamline that to support new business models or new different ways you want to sell, subscriptions or usage-based, any different business model. So in a very rudimentary way, the step one is assuming whether it's a billing or traditional ERP fulfilled order, that all the required steps were met already. So once that's processed now by the billing, if you're purchasing a subscription online, there's usually an integration to our backend, the entitlement piece that triggers now the entitlement that has what the user purchased, their terms, their limits, et cetera, right? So what they have access to. There's usually some communication to the user via email or via on-screen. Thanks for your purchase. Here's your stuff to access your software and those services you purchased. And one model Bill mentioned, and still you have that activation. So the user gets an entitlement code or a product key, however you name it, but they still have to do that activation process. So they key in something to your software or to some console to grab a license, right? So what Bill is doing, work with some customers to do in sort of the step 6 and 7, is to remove that process where the user has to enter some key and there's this dual transaction. The user can probably be more like a SaaS service. They authenticate with some user ID. And essentially, they're just using what's already been provisioned. They're no longer waiting for a license key to be sent. And whether that's on-premise or a SaaS type of delivery, that both models can certainly work. Another thing that Bill kind of mentioned from the CRM side, so we see a few levels of integration from a Salesforce or a CRM kind of approach. One, it's the evaluations. $0 evaluations. Anyone do those in here? $0 orders? I see some heads. Some are too shy to raise their hands. John Cross raises his hands. Rishi, NetApp guys. Yeah, it's very, very tough, especially when you have a SaaS level product or subscription product. There's this expectation that from sign up, you'll get access to your stuff near real time, definitely within 24 hours. If you have the $0 order, you have to get the order in. You have to make sure it's the right part numbers for the order to be approved. And maybe that's triggered to another team to actually instantiate an instance or to actually get something out the door. If something is wrong in that chain, near real time can turn 1, 2, 3 days to get an evaluation out. Right? Where, again, the common experience as far as evaluation is once I sign up, I'll get near real-time access to the environment or software service that I want to evaluate from a customer's perspective. So one of the common integration flows that we see is bypassing the traditional ERP and the $0 order and the part numbers and triggering the evaluation from a Salesforce or a CRM where from the sign up, and this can be partner or the actual user signing up, once they sign up, they have access to this level of service. And of course, you'll have to do some other automation if you're delivering environments and subscription SaaS-based stuff. But with the assumption that has happened, from the sales team now, you actually can get that insight that who's using. And if you're moving more down the telemetry side, as we can do, you can actually see some usage data from that trial environment. So if you have any existing BI or logic, you can sort of rate your trials. You can have a sales rep or a sales admin in your Salesforce, and they can go and they can, at a glance, get a report to know who has a trial, when is it going to expire, and what's the activity of that use. So it becomes a powerful tool there. Another common workflow around the integration of sales of a CRM, Salesforce, is if you think of the renewal, having that same data around renewals. Right, so being able to, if I was a salesperson, to go in and to have a report to know what was ordered, when it was ordered, what was the previous price, the usage activity, if they're likely to renew or not. Being able to have that in a single place, again, can be, it arms them to have that negotiation much earlier opposed to just, towards the end of the cycle and they call, are you guys signing, are you going to renew today? Right, so you can arm them with the level of data from a single view, something we commonly do there with the install base. I've actually spoken to someone, I don't think I see them here, but they use Salesforce as more of the contract admin piece. And for them, they want to actually get some usage data to go along with the contract to know at the renewal time, should we be talking at the same tier or higher or lower? So they can have that level of data and not necessarily rely on the customer to ask, how are you really using our software? Right? So they can get that level of certainly insight there. From a workflow perspective, the previous slide I showed just was with the traditional activation where there's this transfer, but regardless of how the customers are using, from the Sentinel solution side, if it's the traditional license keys with RMS or cloud, the level of access or data is there, right? So we know when it was consumed, how they're using the service, et cetera. So we can have that data, whether they're activating directly from the software, or if it's an offline kind of usage where they activate via a portal, or I think in Bill's case, the registration happened through a portal, right? So there's a very one small slim set where it's really focused on probably users, but if you're signing up with partners and distributors, again, you can have that level of certainly access. So that's at a rough glance, where we see some integration touch points and how supporting you sell differently, right? But again, I probably jump back to this one previous slide, not the manual. Again, it's key that you take a look at, where these different systems touch and the importance and how you can interface that to really, as Bill mentioned, moving to near real-time or instant delivery beyond those who still ship dongle in the box. I saw some head shaking over here when Bill said the dongle in the box, or even hardware. So in my summary, I want to show Bill some love too. So we partner with Trimble to change and transform the way the world works. But more seriously, when we engage our customers, really it's about improving the customer experience as you support selling differently, right? A lot of the changing business model is to capture value and create value differently. And a key part of that is around the customer experience, right? How they purchase, what they can they buy add-ons, and what level of service can they instantiate and purchase without necessarily speaking to sales rep. And of course, not all of the product catalog is going to go the way of e-commerce, but from the integration standpoint, you can have a similar as well as operational experience from the fulfillment standpoint. And then ultimately come down to increasing operational efficiency and efficiency gains, and we'll hear a bit more about that in the next session. So, Elfine. That's it.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you.
I've been following the repair of the Oroville Dam, and they're using a lot of apparently GPS to control their roller compacted concrete. Is that your system that they're using, Kiewit?
It could be. We do have a paving system that's both with the concrete paving and asphalt paving, and then just general compaction. And some of that is associated with the joint venture with Caterpillar. And one of the things that's really interesting is landfills. I don't know, landfills are pretty boring, right? But landfills, it's very important that they compact to a certain. They have to take advantage of their cubic yards or cubic meters or whatever, because there's 7 million, 10 million cubic meters in the landfill, and they got to make sure that they compact that properly in order to take advantage of all of that space. So we're seeing a huge opportunity with landfills to do that type of work. And then in addition to that, then they can fly over with the drone, right? And then using imaging, they can also then kind of get a larger kind of understanding of where they're, where they're changing the elevations and where they're using their landfill. So it could very well be that it could be Trimble technology that is at that dam. Hopefully I haven't looked at that for a while. Hopefully that situation is better now. I know for a while
they're scheduled to complete by November 1st per their contract.
Oh, good.
And it looks like the blade on their dozer has a sensor on each side.
Oh, yeah.
And their goal is to put down a 15-inch layer, which is then compacted to 12 inches. And so I'm sure that they're using it not just to control how much they put on there, but also to have an auditable record of how much they put on and how much they compress.
That sounds very. There's Denver. The Denver area has a couple of places that one is called Rocky Flats, and that's where they made 60,000 plutonium detonators back during the Cold War in the 80s and 90s. And then there's another place called the Rocky Mountain Arsenal. I don't know, and that supposedly was at one point one of the most contaminated areas. Now they're turning it into a wildlife area. So, but what they did was they had to put a certain amount of rock, so it was crushed, like crushed concrete, like 3 or 4 feet, and then they put some kind of weird clay, gray clay on top of it, some kind of to make it like a barrier, and then 5 or 6 feet of dirt on top of that. And I think they've been working on that for like 10 years. And I mean, when you go out there and see it, you've got all these trucks. I mean, they have 4 or 5 dozers, and then these big excavators, and then these big, 30-ton trucks going back and forth. We don't want to get in front of one of those. But I know there's a lot of work like that going on to reinforce dams and to, stop contamination or to make, some of these contaminated areas more usable.
Do your partners have access to a portal whereby they can trigger these activations so that it then generates an order?
Well, no, we're working on that now, and because it's a little bit of a flip-flop, right? And if you look at some of these sites, at some of the places that I have the list, like Adobe, and the Spotify thing is amazing. How they went from, like, that company's only 5 years old, and now they have 60 million subscribers. But they have 3 steps, right? So it's like this: you pick what you want, and then you effectively create an account, or you designate your account. If you don't have one, you have to create a new one, and then you figure out how you're going to pay. And so it's 3 steps. In fact, Adobe's got it down to 2 steps, but they kind of cheat because they really don't count the pick your subscriptions. They just call it 2 steps for pick your account, which is really telling us who you are, and then how you're going to pay.
Do you think that'll work from a B2B, in a B2B world, as opposed to consumers? Because consumers can put in a credit card, but companies need POs, right?
Yeah, but let's say I'm a dealer, and I have credit. Let's say I have $1 million credit, and I know you, and you're my end customer. I can expose that sign up to you, and then when you pay, that last step, you just say, charge my dealer, or pay my dealer with credit card. So you're just manipulating that third step in order to expose, so that I don't have to do the signups for everybody. If I had 1 million customers, I'd have to hire 100 people just to do signups. So being able to expose that sign-up process using my credit, I think, is where the action can be.
That's interesting, and it's great. Except that conflicts with the way purchasing happens within a company, right? Because purchasing, whoever wants to procure has to go open up a rec. Somebody in finance has to approve it to make sure that they have budget. And then when the invoice comes in, because it's been billed for, they match that with the approval, right? But this one, it sounds like we are triggering the invoicing of the purchasing, which we know what they want to buy. But how do we know then that company will pay us? Because they may not have gotten the budgetary approvals that were necessary beforehand.
Yeah, so it's the terms and conditions, right? Someone has to accept the terms and conditions as part of that process. And that's where you're obligating, creating an obligation to pay. And a lot of times, we have, if you're using a traditional channel, right, your dealer is accepting those terms and conditions, so the dealer's going to pay. But now you're extending that acceptance. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to make sure that we do this, we have to have an agreement, a reseller agreement with that dealer. So it's like a blanket terms and conditions. And then the end customer ends up accepting the terms and conditions. But those terms and conditions have to accommodate the end user accepting the term and having an obligation to the dealer, and then that dealer having an obligation to us. So it's all in the legalese, right, of the terms and conditions. And we've manipulated. I mean, it's not really manipulation, but you just need to add that type of content to your terms and conditions of sale. But yeah, we call it dealer authorization, and it seems to work pretty well. We have quite a few scenarios where we use it. But you're right, you have to have the legal framework in order to make sure that you don't have any loopholes.
Awesome, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you both very much.
Thank you.